What's up, Shark Boys and Lava Girls? I am Tommy, along with my co-host Andreas. This is another episode of Shark Tuah, and there has been a lot of hockey since we have last talked to you. The Sharks have gone 3-4 in our last 7 games. We went 0-6 versus the Avalanche. We went 3-2 over the Canucks. We lost 3-4 to the Golden Knights. We beat the Mammoth 6-3. We lost to the Capitals 7-1. It was a painful one. We lost to the Sharks 4-1. It was less painful. Actually a pretty good game. And just now we beat the Hurricanes 4-1 in what you'd think would be an amazing game. What turned into, for a little bit there, kind of a painful game, but overall we got through it. It was a great win. Got some good results from boys that we love. What have you thought about this most recent stretch, my friend?
Yeah, so some up and downs for sure for this it's not even a week of Sharks hockey. It's 7 games. That's almost like a week of Sharks hockey if we played every day. It's been, sort of a tough go for the Sharks a little bit. We've had some offensive dry times recently a little bit, which is nothing new. You know, the Sharks have been around basically bottom 3 in the league in terms of expected goals for most of the year. So it's sort of catching up with us a little bit. I think that we have seen that this team has a bit of an offensive anemia especially when Celebrini is not scoring. If he happens to have an off game, it is just very difficult for the rest of the team to pick up that slack. We saw that in the game against the Stars that you mentioned earlier. I think that's a perfect example of it's not even the Stars were some spectacular team in this game. They are a very good team, but in that game they looked pretty middling. But it's just, if the team is unable to produce offense besides one guy, and the one guy happens to have an off night, then it's tough to win a lot of games. And so I think we've seen a few games like that recently, and that sort of is reflected with our record, being under 500 in these 7 games. But another thing that is worth noting is that this was easily the hardest stretch of hockey that the Sharks will probably be playing all year, provided that we don't make it to the playoffs. So you can sort of feel okay about how the Sharks came out of the situation. We did play against the Avs. We played against the Capitals. We played against the Stars today. We beat the Hurricanes. And those are actually, as of right now, I believe those are the top 4 ranked team in the NHL. And so, big test for the Sharks. And I wouldn't say that we passed with flying colors. Like you mentioned, we did get blown out by the Avs. We did get blown out by the Capitals, although at least some of the offense was not completely one-sided in that game. We weren't putting it in the net, but we were sort of competing for a decent chunk of the game. But despite these blowouts and how bad they may look at a first impression, I think that considering the circumstances, the Sharks can feel fairly okay about how they came out of this series of games. Because again, this is the Sharks, it's sort of on record that we had the hardest start of the year of any NHL team, really. We have just been facing against really good competition for the vast majority of these games so far. Can only think of a couple of games offhand where we were playing against a team that is not that great, those games against Utah, which we did end up taking 2 out of 3. But overall, given the circumstances, I think that we should feel all right about these games, even though they weren't actually really spectacular games for the most part for the Sharks. But there are a lot of positive takeaways. Even though Celebrini has not, over the past couple of weeks, I think he might have 1 or 2 goals, maybe, something to that effect. But despite that, his scoring rate has stayed quite high. As of the time that we are recording this right now, Celebrini is actually in sole possession of second in the league in scoring. And so, sort of the same story that we've seen a lot of the season so far, where not a perfect Sharks squad, but still a pretty big improvement over last year. These blowout games where we're getting absolutely dunked on by good teams. Last year, it seemed like it was every game, especially the year before that. It was literally basically every game. And then this year, we're in a lot of the games. We had that game, we beat the Canucks, which of course we'd hope to beat the Canucks because they've been very poor this season. We beat the Mammoth fairly resoundingly. And then I think today was not a perfect game. We were getting dominated for almost the entire third period against Carolina, but we won 4-1, and really there was a lot of positives there. I think that the defense was overall quite clean in this game, which is a shocker, being that we actually iced both Klingberg and Nick Leddy in this game, and this was actually the first time that we have ever won a game this whole season where we had both Klingberg and Leddy in the lineup. So that's nice to see. We'll touch a little bit more on the Klingberg-Leddy situation a little bit later in this video. But overall, I'd say we can feel pretty much all right about this stretch of Sharks hockey.
Yeah, I agree. That Canucks game as well, it felt like we were playing anytime we were on the ice, 5v5. The refs were on the Canucks team. I try not to be an uber homer when it comes to referee decisions. I understand that refereeing is a hard job, but that entire game, that's the biggest thing that I remember from that game is just how many awful calls there were by the refs, and they were mostly against the Sharks.
There was definitely,
we did get a couple.
Yeah, I was gonna say there was a lot of bad calls against the Sharks, but I don't really see that one as like the refs were like trying to screw us kind of game. I feel like it was just bad reffing all around. The Canucks were screwed over by a couple of calls, although like some of the most like memorable ones were definitely against us. In particular, like the end of the game where there was like half of a second left, and originally it was determined that the face-off would be outside of our zone, and then the refs get back on the mic, and they're like, actually, it's going to come back inside the zone, and no one can possibly explain why. It was a whole thing, and it was like just a bad look for the NHL, given like how long they had to spend figuring out that situation, which would ultimately lead to like 0.5 seconds of actual hockey being played after the bell. I don't know. The whole thing was pretty ridiculous. So yeah, you know, it's not as if the cards have been stacked in the Sharks' favor in all of these games. In fact, I feel like the cards have been stacked against us, not just from a reffing perspective, but from sort of that strength of schedule perspective that I mentioned earlier. But I think it is a good thing to look back on, because now the Sharks are actually through what is almost certainly the toughest stretch of hockey that we play all year. And so now you can sort of be like, okay, well, in a way, obviously the season going long has its own challenges, like people get hurt and stuff like that. But in terms of like the opponents that we're scheduled to face off against, we should be, you know, better suited to play some decent hockey for the rest of the year, because we don't have another stretch like this where it's like Capitals, Avs, like Golden Knights, Stars, like back to back to back to back. There's just nothing like that really in the rest of the Sharks schedule, and so I can sort of come out of this this 7-game stretch feeling optimistic somewhat about the future of Sharks hockey in this season. At the very least, I'm thinking that like if we made it through the beginning of the year and we're not like in the cellar right now, I do think the odds are pretty low that we finish in like the bottom 3 or even maybe like the bottom 5 in the league. And so, you know, overall, I'm a pretty happy Sharks fan. However, there are absolutely some issues that we have seen over this stretch, and they are not all just like, oh, well, you know, the team is like, you know, it has its struggles, like it's not a perfect team and you sort of just have to ride them out. There have been some issues that I think have been sort of like self-inflicted on the part of the Sharks, and particularly on the part of Sharks management. And so I think that this is a good opportunity to sort of transition into our main talking point for this episode, which is, once again, and we have sort of, you know, gone into this situation at length in previous episodes, so I don't want to feel like we're harping extensively on this kind of situation, but the Sharks do have too many defensemen. And we talked about how, you know, if we don't get this situation solved in the immediate future, like there's going to be some games where you're like, okay, well, I really want to see Sam Dickinson in the lineup every game, or I really want to see Shakir Mukhamadullin in the lineup every game, and they haven't been necessarily in the lineup every game because we just have too many defensemen, and the team feels that they need to get like all of these guys in, getting their reps in, and that we understand that that's the situation, you know, and you can say what you will about like how Greer probably should have solved this situation like weeks ago, maybe even months ago before the season started. But obviously the situation was not solved. And so we're in this position where sometimes you have games where like Nick Leddy is playing instead of a guy like Shakir Mukhamadullin or Sam Dickinson or what have you. And that's, as frustrating as that is, it's not like a new thing. We all knew that this was like an issue that was going to have to get solved eventually, and the fact that it hasn't been solved yet means that it's going to continue to be an issue. And so, but the problem is not really that, because this is all, we've covered this extensively in previous episodes. The issue is that now, in the last like 3 games, we have seen Shakir Mukhamadullin be the healthy scratch now in 3 consecutive games, including like that game against the Capitals. I mentioned earlier that our offense was pretty okay in that game. And so you might be wondering, why did the Sharks lose 7-1 in that game? Well, the answer is because the Sharks defense was abominable in that game. It was sort of reminded me of that game against the Ducks earlier in the season, in that like offensively the team kind of showed up more or less, not like great, but like okay. And we had sort of gave ourselves an opportunity, but the defense was so bad that it just took away those opportunities and made the game look, and it wasn't, I don't just mean that it looked like a blowout. It absolutely was a blowout, and it was basically entirely on the defensive core. They were not able to perform in any way in that game. And it was bad. And so after that, like, really putrid defensive performance against Washington, we saw some mix-ups. But one of the mix-ups that we did not see was Shakir Mukhamadullin coming back into the lineup. He did not play in Washington. He did not play the game after that. And what we saw instead now 2 games in a row is Mukhamadullin sitting out with Klingberg and Leddy both playing, both on the ice. And this is now like, thankfully I can say that this is no longer the case after the Carolina game, which was a Sharks dub. But before that, we had never once won a single game with both Klingberg and John Klingberg and Nick Leddy in the lineup. And so the question is like, why are we insisting on having these guys play every single night to the extent that you're scratching Mukhamadullin not just once, not just twice, but 3 times in a row? And unless there's like a nagging injury, which obviously it's possible, something like that we just don't know about, but if that's not the case, then I can't understand that kind of decision making, because although Mukhamadullin has not had the perfect season, there have been games this year that we did lose because of a defensive miscue on Shakir Mukhamadulin's fault, but we have had so many more games that were just complete throwaways from like very early in the game because of tremendous mistakes made by John Klingberg. In that Washington game, we saw one of the worst turnovers that I think I've genuinely ever seen by a Sharks player, which resulted in a shorthanded goal. And not even in that same game was Klingberg actually punished for that. He was finally at the end of the third period. He missed 1 power play. He was taken off the first power play unit in that game. But he otherwise, basically has been untouched. Hasn't missed a game since then. Getting like 20 plus minutes of ice time every single night. And so the question is like, why are these vets like Nick Leddy and John Klingberg so unpunished relative to a guy like Mukhamadullin, who basically he makes 1 significant mistake and then he's out for 3 games? I don't know. It seems a little crazy to me. But it's easy, I think, to focus, like, John Klingberg right now is kind of the easiest target on this team in terms of, like, going after him. Because, yes, Klingberg has been a big disappointment. He has all these, like, really obvious miscues where will be in the middle of an offensive rush, and John Klingberg will find a way to, like, turn the puck over or not make a decision fast enough, and it gets stolen away. Every Sharks pundit, every Sharks fan has had negative things to say about John Klingberg. But in a way, it has almost taken some of the pressure off of a guy like Nick Leddy, who has been really like equally terrible in like fewer games played than John Klingberg. I actually think that Klingberg has provided more of value to this team than Nick Leddy, and I don't even know if it's that close. Klingberg at least has the ability in some certain situations, and we saw this versus Carolina, to like produce offensively, or he's good at zone entries. He's like a pretty like reasonably high skill puck moving defenseman, at least compared to what we have on this team, which is not really a lot of high skill puck moving defensemen. So there is some potential value coming out of John Klingberg, but where is the value for Nick Leddy? And that's to me, that is really the main focus of this segment here, is discussing like just how bad has Nick Leddy actually been. I think that the eyeball test says that Nick Leddy has been really bad this year, but the underlying statistics suggest that maybe Nick Leddy has been even worse than the eyeball test suggests.
Yeah, Nick Leddy has not been performing really at all. I mean, I don't think there were high expectations of him going into the season. John Klingberg, there was a sense like, hey, this guy might have gotten his injury issues sorted. He was once like really good. He isn't as old as Nick Leddy is. Nick Leddy is like aging. Is at the point where you kind of start to expect a mid-tier to middle-high tier player to start to kind of age out. Whereas John Klingberg, I believe, is just a couple years younger. I could be wrong in that, but that is my memory. Nick Leddy definitely feels like he is pretty much always a negative. I feel like his negatives are less obvious than John Klingberg, especially in our second to last game. I don't remember exactly who it was. What was the game before we played Carolina?
It was Dallas.
Dallas, yes. There were some really big Klingberg misplays, like some really huge ones. We saw him overskate the puck, leading to a shorthanded goal. We saw him just absolutely get breezed past multiple times. It was quite frustrating to watch. Whereas Nick Leddy, I feel like just consistently is not quite where you want him to be. He's consistently moving slower than you want him to be. He is just his issues, his errors don't feel as big, but I can't think of a single Nick Leddy win that I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen Nick Leddy really drive play. I don't think I've ever seen Nick Leddy do anything that I am super excited about, where at least John Klingberg, today he had a couple good moments. He's had a couple good moments in the past. What do the advanced stats say?
So before I get into the advanced stats, let's sort of take a moment to think about like what makes John Klingberg even like remotely serviceable on this team. It is the fact that there is not a lot of offense on our blue line, and John Klingberg is one of the few guys that even in like a glorious moment of offense can actually put the puck in the net. Whereas like you put Mario Ferraro in that same position, and we've actually seen this several times over the last few games where like Celebrini will give Ferraro like an incredible pass right in front of the net, and Ferraro doesn't even think about shooting the puck into the net. He tries to make a pass to someone that does not exist, and it gets turned over right away. Whereas like in that spot, it might not be a good shot, it might not be a goal, but you can actually expect John Klingberg to sort of take that shot. And so when John Klingberg is on the ice, our numbers aren't great, but we aren't like getting outscored by this incredibly dramatic amount. Whereas like when a guy like Nick Leddy is on the ice, our team's collective offense has been very bad. And so I'm going to actually go ahead and put up some of these stats on the screen as we talk about them. But obviously, like Nick Leddy's individual offense in this year has been pretty terrible. He hasn't really been putting the puck on net. In fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, headed into this Carolina game, Nick Leddy had all of 10 shot attempts for the entire season in about 172 minutes of ice time, which is really dreadful. That is actually the absolute last of all defensemen in the entire NHL. And so I think that this is a great opportunity to mention some of the statistics in which Nick Leddy is actually the worst defenseman in the entire NHL. And there are many of them. So first of all, Nick Leddy, from an individual perspective, has been really bad. He's put up all of 3.47 shot attempts per 60 minutes, which is dead last, and it's actually like a full shot attempt per 60 minutes less than the second to worst defenseman in that category, which is truly repugnant. Like, that is really, really bad. Like, you definitely can't be, even as a defenseman, even as a guy who's like more of an assist-oriented defenseman who's like probably not expected to put up a ton of shots on goal, 3.47 over 60 minutes, that's ridiculous. And that's not even like high like scoring chances. Those are just like any shot from any position that would get the number up. He just can't do it. But it's not just the individual perspective that we're talking about here. The on-ice expected goal percentage for the Sharks when Nick Leddy has been on the ice is 28.4%. So basically what that means is when Nick Leddy is on the ice, if a goal is scored, it is 3 in 4 chance that is being scored against the Sharks rather than for the Sharks. So, like, essentially we are being outscored 3-1 when Nick Leddy is on the ice, which is really bad. Like, he's not a I think we all know, and we kind of knew going into the season, that Nick Leddy is not, like, gonna be your defensive, like, mastermind. Like, he's not gonna be the guy who's, like, making really slick, great plays to get the team out of danger. If Nick Leddy has any value for any NHL team at this point in his career, or really at any point in his career, it's going to be from that offensive perspective. But as I think we've already demonstrated quite clearly, Nick Leddy is not producing individual offense for himself. And so you might think, well, maybe he's just, an assist guy and he's helping the rest of the team score. But the reality is that he is not. Because if he was, then we wouldn't be getting outscored 3-1 when Nick Leddy is on the ice. And so the reality is that Nick Leddy cannot play defensively. He's a very, very, very bad defensive defenseman. And he is also, as we've come to discover, one of the worst offensive defensemen in the entire league, if not the absolute dead last worst defenseman in the entire league from an offensive perspective. This season, his expected goals from like a low danger position is .08, which is nothing. Like literally nothing. Like that means that there's like, if you played this entire timeline that he's played so far, there's less than a 1 in 10 chance that he scores a single goal, which is just putrid. And the reason you might wonder, why am I bringing up the low danger shots specifically, is because that's all he has. He has 5 shot attempts this year, and 5 of them were low danger shots. I believe 3 of them were like missed the net entirely, and then maybe 2 of them were like medium or high danger. I actually don't even think that they were. I'm pretty sure that he has basically exclusively had low danger shots, or he has missed the net entirely. And so I need a deep breath. I'm sorry. So if Nick Leddy is not contributing defensively, which we knew he wouldn't, even though he has been used on the PK for periods of this season, including in recent games, which is something that I will never understand, something that I cannot defend in any way, because again, even like Nick Leddy at the peak of his career was not a penalty kill guy, or even any kind of a defensive defenseman. So why is he being used in that spot? No idea. No idea. But even if we're discounting that entirely, from an even strength perspective, Nick Leddy has been a terrible defenseman, probably one of the worst on the team, if not the worst on the team. He has been an absolutely god-awful offensive defenseman. So what is he really doing? What is he contributing for this team? And one final stat that I wanted to bring up in terms of the Nick Leddy experience is that right now, Nick Leddy has a 1.48 on-ice expected goal for, which is another team statistic. That's not an individual statistic. It means that when Nick Leddy is on the ice over 60 minutes, the Sharks are expected to score less than 1.5 goals, which is crazy. That might, and I included a couple extra defensemen here, again, to give a little bit of context for that statistic. The next worst is 1.73 for another defenseman in the NHL. And so it's just really, really atrocious. Like, not only is Nick Leddy, like, bad from an individual offensive perspective, he is also crippling the Sharks' offense. Like, he can't field a puck. He can't, like, send it over for a good assist to someone. If he, like, is in his own zone, it's so common, and I've seen this, like, multiple times over just the past 2 games. Someone will skate up behind Nick Leddy, and he has no urgency to gather the puck in front of him. He keeps, like, slowly gliding toward the puck at this like glacial rate that only Nick Leddy moves practically, and he gets overtaken, he gets the puck stolen away from him, and it creates a great opportunity in the Sharks defensive zone. And so I'm just kind of sick of it, because if this was last year, I'd be saying, okay, like, this sucks and I don't want to watch this, but the options are so limited. Like, what are we going to put, like, Jan Ruda in that spot instead?
Whoa,
like,
2-time Stanley Cup champ Jan Ruda slander.
And that's more than Nick Leddy. He doesn't have 2 cups. He has 1 cup. 1 pitiful cup.
I would actually so much rather have Jan Ruda on this team. Is that bad?
I don't know if you're wrong. And it's hard to say, because obviously Jan Ruda was like he was basically the Nick Leddy of this team last year. He was like one of the worst defenders in the entire NHL. But this year, the Sharks have been actually pretty decent. And so it hurts watching a guy like Nick Leddy, but it hurts even more knowing that we have a guy like Shakir Mukhamadullin, who, again, not a perfect defenseman, has not had a perfect season, but he has been better in literally every measurable metric. Like, it's not even close. These are just, again, the statistics that I've highlighted here, like his Nick Leddy's dreadful on-ice expected goal rate, his dreadful individual expected goal rates. These are terrible. These are just the stats in which Nick Leddy is the worst in the league. There were so many more that he was like bottom 5 or like bottom 10, and I didn't include them because it's not like I really wanted to make a point that not only is Nick Leddy like bad, and not only is he like one of the worst, in these categories, he is the worst. And so why are we playing him so many nights out of the season when we could be playing a guy like Sam Dickinson, or we could be playing a guy like Shakir Mukhamadullin? To me, the defensive logjam where we have 9 defensemen and we need to get rid of one, that does not even account for why are we still using him in this way? You could easily, even if you're not going to waive him, which is what I think the Sharks should be doing, and what frankly I think we should have done like at least a few weeks ago, but even if you're not going to waive Nick Leddy, that doesn't mean you have to play him. It doesn't mean you have to play him multiple times in a row, even like not alongside, but even like knowing that every time we play him in a game with John Klingberg, we basically automatically lose the game. And yet over and over again, it's Nick Leddy and John Klingberg in the lineup, and it's just very frustrating for me. I feel like I'm giving myself like a headache talking about it.
Yeah, so when my good friend Andreas here was doing the research for this segment, he called me and he was like, "Is this a good time to talk?" And from the tone of his voice, I thought that a major tragedy had occurred in his life. I could feel his sadness, his despair, his anger all in his voice. I was like, oh man, like I really need to support my friend here. And he was like, did you know that Nick Leddy is the worst defenseman in the league in like 8 individual stats? And truly the tragedy was Nick Leddy. The Nick Leddy experience was the tragedy.
It was the tragedy. And specifically the one that I really wanted to run by him in that moment was the fact that across 172 minutes of ice time, which is not like an insane amount, but given how many games that Nick Leddy has been injured or otherwise unavailable, it's a really high percentage of the ice time the Sharks have played in that stretch of time. And he has 10 shot attempts. 10! In 172 minutes. Like, what do you mean he has 10 shot attempts? So yeah, that one really got me. I felt like I was losing my mind, like pouring through the statistics, like just looking at the pure numbers. I was like so baffled that I had to give Tommy a call just so that I felt like I wasn't completely losing my mind. And there is one other stat I wanted to highlight, and I don't have it in front of me, but I do remember the generality of it, which is that you might remember those game scores from the hockey stat cards that we highlighted earlier in the podcast. Where basically like every player's individual performance is ascribed to like a number. So the average game score for Nick Leddy is like minus 1.5, which is, I believe, third worst in the entire NHL, counting forwards and defensemen. And so that just goes to show you that, like, from an individual standpoint, Nick Leddy has been, like, one of the worst NHL players in the entire league this year. And he's not making up for that in terms of, like, well, you could say, like, if someone has, like, a really bad individual game score on average, but, like, they're winning their minutes when they're on the ice, you could be like, well, there's intangibles in this sport, you know, like, sometimes a guy might be, like, making himself worse in an attempt to make the other players around him better, or maybe he has this, like, Ryan Reeves-esque like glue factor where like everyone loves him and he holds the team together, so you even like are willing to take his like minus production on the ice. Like I know for a long time that's how like Ryan Warsofsky would have talked about a guy like Barclay Goodrow. Like he might not be producing on the ice, but he has all these intangible qualities that make him so good, and that sort of like you can tell that like when he's on the ice, he's doing a good job or whatever. None of this is true of Nick Leddy. I don't even think it's really true of Barclay Goodrow most of the time, for being honest, but it is super aggressively untrue of Nick Leddy. And so my question to you and to the fans and to Ryan Warsofsky and anyone who's still listening to me rant at this point is why? Why are we continuing to use Nick Leddy like this? And I guess I should give the most minor disclaimer, which is to say that in the past couple of games, Nick Leddy hasn't been that terrible. I actually think that yesterday against the Star, or the day before yesterday against Dallas, he was like arguably a net positive. He picked up a primary assist in that game. And then tonight he was like against Carolina. He was not very good. I think that he was kind of dragging down Sam Dickinson, but he wasn't like game-losingly terrible. In fact, the whole blue line was pretty okay, which is shocking considering we had both Klingberg and Leddy on the ice for so much of the game. But even despite these bounce-back games, what you could call a bounce-back from Nick Leddy, he is still just at the very, very bottom of the league in like pretty much every stat that we have highlighted here. And so, when does something give? When we talked about the defensive logjam in a previous episode, or in multiple previous episodes, my opinion thus far has always been that like, I would like to see somebody like Mario Ferraro possibly traded, like a guy who has some value right now, and we can actually get something out of this situation instead of just like waiving a guy. That is no longer my opinion. As of right now, I think the best option, and probably like easily the best option, is to waive Nick Leddy. Because sure, you know, we're on the hook for the money that we're paying him this year, but we're on the hook either way. And that's just an unforced mistake. Like, we claim Nick Leddy, now we're on the hook for his contract. But that doesn't mean that we have to fall into the sunk cost fallacy of like, oh, like, we need to play Nick Leddy all the time so that like there's a chance that we could maybe flip him at the deadline or something like that. People say that about John Klingberg, and I hear that and I scoff. I really don't think anyone's trading for, that's me. I go, but maybe in some universe you could flip John Klingberg for like a conditional 4th round pick or something if a team is really desperate for a certain type of player. But what is the desperation that would lead a team to surrender assets for Nick Leddy? There is no such situation. There will never be such a situation. And so, no, you really don't need to get Nick Leddy in the lineup. There is no importance of having him on the roster. The easiest way to solve this roster logjam, defensive logjam situation, is to simply just get rid of him. And if someone claimed him, I would be shocked. I would be astonished. And so you can sort of say like, okay, maybe Nick Leddy can like teach some stuff to like the young Barracuda players, or maybe he can have some value at that AHL level, or maybe he's not so slow that he can't contribute at that level. He clearly can't contribute at the NHL level, and so I say waive him, and then when the 99.9% eventuality occurs that he is not claimed, maybe he can be like a guy of a certain amount of value for that AHL team. Like we saw Iorio go down there, and he was like actually pretty effective, and he has been similarly like ineffective to Nick Leddy, although not quite nearly as bad, I wouldn't say. But in many ways, actually, in a lot of these stats that I pulled up, Iorio was like kind of pushing Nick Leddy, especially in like the offensive categories. Iorio just like cannot contribute, but he was able to contribute for the Barracuda, so maybe Nick Leddy could. But at this point, I'm sort of dawdling. I'm trying to like get my thoughts together, and I've had multiple days to prepare for this episode with all the research I've done, and I still like, I'm sitting here and I'm feeling overwhelmed by how truly awful Nick Leddy has been.
Visibly overwhelmed.
I am.
He started this, and it was, it's a little late in the evening. It's a little late in the day. We were maybe a little low energy. I've watched this man through the power of rage, hatred, and anger, all of it fueled by Nick Leddy, grow 10 sizes in the chair beside me.
It's exactly like the Grinch's heart. I feel like I've grown over the period of time that I've been talking. I feel like my heart has enlarged to perhaps a dangerous extent, and it's really like I'm willing to put that on Nick Leddy. And if I die right now, I want you to tell Nick Leddy that he is responsible.
I will happily do that. One more thing, just to add to the dog pile on Nick Leddy. Before we end off, because I can feel the dog pile ending. I don't really want it to yet. The entirety of the Sharks' big hot streak this season, after our losing streak, the entirety of it was during Nick Leddy's injury. That when he came back, we started to slow down.
Was that actually the first game that we lost? Was Nick Leddy's first game back? I don't know that for a fact.
I don't know that for a fact, but I know that the first games that we lost were when Nick Leddy came back.
All changed. Like, the vibes of this team are so much worse when Nick Leddy is playing. And it's actually like, where this is very much a Nick Leddy focused segment, the same is basically true for Klingberg. Like, I remember we were at the game where it was like the first game where they benched John Klingberg. Won the game. We won the game. And so it just makes you... And there's that stat about how, like, when Mukka Madulin and Sam Dickinson are playing, I believe the Sharks are 6-1. And then in games where Klingberg and Leddy have played, we are now a grand total of, I believe, like 1-7. Like, we have finally won this game against the Hurricanes. Before that, we were winless with both of them in the lineup. But even after that, like, the discrepancy is so massive. This is a team that is truly made, like, worse in every category, practically, when Nick Leddy is on the ice, or even just, like, sitting on the bench. Like, if he is anywhere, the team is worse. And so I just wonder when's enough is enough. And I'm very excited because we're getting to, we're past like what? We're about a third of the way through the season now at this point in the year. And so we are like sneaking up slowly on the trade deadline. And the time will eventually come when hopefully guys like Klingberg, maybe even a guy like Nick Leddy are gone. And I don't know that they will necessarily be traded for assets, but the expectation, at least what everyone has been telling me this whole season, is that once we get sort of like past that halfway point, some of the like really trash veterans who have been playing a lot of time for the Sharks theoretically should start to get phased out in favor of like younger guys. Like we might finally see like maybe like Quentin Musty make his debut, Igor Chernyshov, or perhaps Luca Cagnoni comes up and gets the opportunity. Oh. Maybe Sam Dickinson finally after all this time gets a shot at playing on the power play, something like that. Very exciting concepts to me.
You're exciting me.
I'm trying to excite you. I'm really trying to titillate you guys because I'm trying to titillate myself.
It's working. My tits are elated.
I've seen so much of this Nick Leddy, this John Klingberg experience, and I'm through. I'm through with it. More so than I was with any player last year, maybe even any player the year before that, if I'm being completely real, other than maybe like Philip Zadina, who I remember very frustrating me a great deal.
I didn't love how Philip Zadina played. I agree that he was frustrating, but I wanted him to be good so bad that I want Philip Zadina to be. I craved Philip Zadina's success when he was with us. And it didn't ever work out. I do want to put a just something positive here at the end, as I feel the episode winding down. Sam Dickinson in these last 7 days of games has really started to come into his own as an NHL player. Before he was a good a good rookie, somebody who is a great prospect, somebody that has future potential. I think that obviously he has so much more to grow, both physically and as a skilled hockey player. But we've seen him be solid. We've seen him be reliable. We've seen him make intelligent plays quickly, which is something that he was struggling with, as all new players to the league other than Macklin Celebrini do. And so I have really enjoyed, on the flip side of the Nick Leddy experience, the Sam Dickinson experience. He has been even tied to Nick Leddy in some of these games, and he has brought that pairing to adequacy through his big, strong, muscly shoulders.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's a coincidence that we're seeing Sam Dickinson now really come into his own in the first stretch of hockey in a while, where it feels like he's being allowed to actually play every game. I think it was Alan Hashida, the pre-show guy for NBC, who said that he is very much hoping to see Sam Dickinson play in every single game of this road trip that we're on right now. And that's one of the first times that I've heard Alan Hashida talk, and I've been like, wow, I literally 100% agree with that. Like, Sam Dickinson needs a little bit of stability at this point in his season. He has been out and in and out and in of the lineup all year, it feels like. And now that he's finally being given a little bit of a vote of confidence to actually play like the majority of his games, it is no surprise to me that he is starting to flower. Like, these guys, like especially a young rookie player who's just trying to make his way in the NHL for the first time, they need that sense of stability. They need that sense of like the team having like a certain degree of confidence in them. And so that even kind of comes back, as much as we were trying to get away from it, back to the Nick Leddy, John Klingberg thing, which is like, not only are you depriving the team of like potentially like good players like Sam Dickinson, like Shakir Mukhamadoula, but you're actually hurting their confidence, their ability to like stabilize this season by having the jerking them in and out of the lineup over and over again. So it's just like all these layers of how the team is being affected negatively by Klingberg and Leddy. And so I'm so hyped for like hopefully the second half of this year where Sam Dickinson is finally allowed to play like almost every game. Shakir Mukhamadoula is allowed to play like nearly every game. And that is such a hopeful, like pleasurable feeling for me, even just thinking about the idea of that happening. And so I feel like that's probably the best place to leave it that we're going to come up with. Overall, like we mentioned earlier, it has been a relatively passable week or two for Sharks hockey, and I'm excited to see how the Sharks rebound now coming into a stretch of games where we're not playing against like the absolute like top 5 best teams in the entire league, like back to back to back to back. I'm pretty thrilled. I think that there's a lot of good ahead in this Sharks season, and I hope that Ryan Warsofsky leads us there in a direct and intelligent fashion.
Yeah, and I think both of us are a little hesitant to have such an overwhelmingly negative, though I think in a fun way. I enjoyed the Nick Leddy rant, but to have an episode that is so negative on the Sharks and one specific member of the Sharks, we fucking love this team. This team brings us so much joy, and I think the reason why we are so frustrated is that this is the first season in years, genuinely years, where we have had true hope. We had true sightings of greatness. We have had a chance to compete. There has not, it has been half of a decade since we have felt so positive about the direction of this team, other than, last or 2 seasons ago when we earned Macklin Celebrini by being the worst team in the league. Like, other than that, there hasn't been. What have we had to look forward to? It's just been draft picks. It's just been
drafting. The
high.
Universe is another one that I've been looking forward to.
And he's been looking forward to that since the day he was born.
That's true.
But so we feel this intensity because, man, it's been so much more fun to watch this team, and we have had flashes of brilliance. One of the best players in the league, like one of the best players in the game of hockey right now, is on our team, and we get to watch him. And sometimes he has to share the ice with John Klingberg and Nick Leddy. And in fact, every time he's on the power play, he has to share the ice with John Klingberg. And so it's just been frustrating. But man, the Sharks' future is bright. You compare this to last season, it's not even close. We are above 500 for the first time in like years. So the Sharks are great. We love the Sharks. We just want what is best for them, like a parent to a rebellious teenager. It feels like we're being negative. It feels like we are dragging them down, but we crave the best for them.
It's like your kid has that one friend. Maybe it's like a boyfriend or something that you just don't like. You don't approve of them. And for us, it's Nick Leddy. Like, it's a bad influence. It's not help. Like, you're never gonna get into college if you keep dating this burnout, and the burnout is Nick Leddy. And so there's a little bit of frustration there. Obviously, this has been a tremendous year for the Sharks so far. So when we highlight these lowlights, I guess really sort of the positive takeaway that you can come up with is that the team has been good enough this year that someone being like dramatically terrible is actually noteworthy enough to warrant an entire episode tearing them down. So thank you to Nick Leddy. Thank you to Ryan Warsofsky for highlighting like how much better things have really been for us this year. And P.S. please get off the team and or retire.
And thank you, Shark Boys and Lava Girls, for joining us on this episode of Shark Tuah. I hope you enjoyed, specifically my friend Andreas and his true anger, his true rage, his true sadness. He is not playing it up. He genuinely feels immense pain by Nick Leddy. So I hope you enjoyed our pain. I hope you felt some catharsis with us. And we hope to see you guys next time. Have a great evening. Bye, 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 bye.